Standing in this overpriced ballroom watching my wife laugh at another man's jokes, I should have felt anger. Instead, I felt something colder. Clarity. The kind that comes when you finally stop pretending everything's fine and start paying attention to what's actually happening. "Orion, darling, come meet Felix's investors," Nola called out, her voice carrying that artificial sweetness she used when she wanted something. 20 years of marriage, and I could read her tales like a poker player reads cards. I adjusted my off-the-rack suit jacket, the same one I'd worn to 3 job interviews this month, and walked toward the cluster of people surrounding Felix Roared, the man who'd somehow become the center of my wife's universe over the past 6 months. Felix stood there in his custom-tailored tuxedo, holding court like some corporate king. At 45, he had the kind of confidence that came from never having to worry about money, never having to choose between groceries and gas. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his smile practiced and predatory. "Ah, the journalist," Felix said when he saw me approaching. The way he said journalist made it sound like a disease. "How's the job hunt going?" Before I could answer, he stepped forward with his wine glass, gesturing broadly as he spoke. The movement looked natural, casual, but I caught the slight adjustment of his wrist at the last second. The entire contents of his glass, some expensive Bordeaux that probably cost more than my monthly car payment, splashed across my chest. The room went quiet, not completely silent, but that particular kind of hush that falls when everyone's pretending not to stare at a car accident. "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry," Felix said, his voice dripping with false concern. "How clumsy of me." Nola rushed over with napkins, dabbing at my shirt with quick, embarrassed movements. "It's fine. It's fine," she whispered. But her eyes were darting around the room, measuring the damage to her reputation. "Really? I should pay for the cleaning." Felix continued loud enough for everyone to hear. Though I suppose with a suit like that, he let the sentence hang there, the implication clear. I stood there, wine dripping from my shirt, and watched the faces around me. Some showed pity, others barely concealed amusement. A few people had already turned away, moving on to more interesting conversations. This was entertainment to them. The struggling ex-journalist getting put in his place by the successful CEO. But I wasn't angry. That was the strange part. Instead, I felt like I was seeing everything clearly for the first time in months. The way Nola's hand lingered on Felix's arm when she thought no one was looking. The expensive perfume she'd started wearing, not the one I'd bought her for our anniversary. The late nights at the office that had become routine. "Don't worry about it," I said, my voice steady. "Accidents happen." Felix smiled, but there was something sharp behind it. "Exactly. Sometimes things just spill over." As Nola ushered me toward the bathroom, I caught sight of my reflection in one of the ballroom's mirrors. Wine-stained shirt, cheap suit, graying hair that needed cutting. I looked like exactly what I was. A 42-year-old man whose career had collapsed along with the newspaper industry, whose wife had found someone more successful to admire. In the bathroom, I cleaned off what I could and studied my face in the mirror. My father used to say that a man's character showed most clearly when he thought no one was watching. Right now, alone in this marble-walled restroom, I made a decision. I wasn't going to rage or make a scene. I wasn't going to confront Nola in front of her colleagues or challenge Felix to some ridiculous confrontation. That's what they expected. The desperate husband having a breakdown. Instead, I was going to pay attention. Really pay attention. When I returned to the party, I positioned myself near the bar where my old friend Sasha was working. She'd been tending bar at events like this for years, invisible to the wealthy guests, but seeing everything. "Rough night?" she asked quietly. polishing a glass. "Getting better," I said, and meant it. For the next hour, I watched and listened. I saw how Felix's hand rested on the small of Nola's back when they talked. I heard him mention a private art gallery opening next week. Saw how Nola's eyes lit up when he suggested she join him. I noticed the way other people at the party treated me like furniture, like someone who didn't matter. They were wrong about that last part. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. Around 10 o'clock, I excused myself and stepped outside for air. The hotel's loading dock was quiet, just a few staff members taking smoke breaks. I found what I was looking for in the service area. Extra bottles of the same wine Felix had been drinking, waiting to be brought upstairs for the late-night crowd. I'd covered enough science stories in my journalism days to know about pH indicators, about substances that changed color when mixed with alcohol. A quick stop at the hotel's gift shop provided what I needed. A packet of those color-changing bath tablets kids loved, the kind that turned water bright purple. Back in the service area, I carefully opened one of the wine bottles, added a small amount of the dissolved tablet, and resealed it. The liquid looked normal, but I knew that when exposed to air and movement, it would transform into something spectacular. Returning to the party, I found Sasha and slipped her a 20 along with a quiet request to make sure Felix got his wine from the bottle I'd marked with a small piece of tape. "You sure about this?" she asked. Never been more sure of anything. 20 minutes later, Felix was holding court again, this time telling a story about some business deal he'd closed. He raised his glass for emphasis, wine sloshing slightly, and I watched as the liquid began to change color. It started as a faint tint, barely noticeable. But as Felix gestured more dramatically, the wine turned a brilliant electric purple. By the time he noticed, half the room was staring. "What the?" Felix looked down at his glass, then at his now purple lips, then at the spreading stain on his pristine white shirt. The room erupted, not in gasps of horror, but in barely suppressed laughter. Someone's phone was already out recording. Within seconds, others joined in. Felix tried to maintain his composure, but purple wine was dripping down his chin, staining his perfect tuxedo. He looked like he'd been attacked by a grape-flavored monster. "Must be something wrong with the wine," someone called out, and the laughter grew louder. I stood in the back, watching Nola's face as her perfect evening crumbled. She tried to help Felix clean up, but every movement just spread the purple stain further. Her carefully constructed image, the successful executive with the powerful boyfriend, was literally dissolving in front of everyone. As the crowd began to disperse, many of them already posting videos online, I walked over to where Nola stood, looking stunned. "Guess the party's over," I said. She looked at me with suspicion, but there was nothing she could prove. I was just the Weinstead husband standing there with my hands in my pockets. "We should go," she said. "You go ahead. I think I'll stay a little longer." As she left with Felix, both of them trying to salvage some dignity while purple wine stained everything they touched. I ordered another drink from Sasha. "That was just the beginning, wasn't it?" she asked. I smiled, really smiled. For the first time in months, just getting started. The next morning, I woke up to find Nola already gone. Her coffee cup sat in the sink, lipstick stained on the rim, and a note on the counter. "Emergency meeting at the agency. Last night was a disaster. We need to talk when I get home." I poured myself coffee and opened my laptop. The videos from last night were already making the rounds on social media. Someone had edited together a compilation of Felix's purple wine incident set to circus music. It had over 10,000 views already. My phone buzzed with a text from our daughter Mara, away at college. "Dad, what happened last night?" Someone sent me a video of Mom's boss looking like he fell into a grape juice factory. I typed back, "Just a little accident at the party. Nothing to worry about." But I was worried about Mara getting caught in whatever was coming next. She deserved better than to watch her parents' marriage implode on social media. I spent the morning doing what I did best, investigating. 20 years as a journalist had taught me how to find information, how to follow paper trails, how to piece together stories that people didn't want told. Nola's credit card statements made interesting reading. Expensive lunches at restaurants I'd never heard of. Charges at high-end boutiques. A hotel bill from last month when she'd claimed to be at a conference in Chicago. The conference had been virtual. Her phone records were harder to access, but not impossible. We shared a family plan, and I still had the account password. The pattern was clear once you knew what to look for. Dozens of calls and texts to Felix's number, often late at night, sometimes lasting hours. But the most revealing discovery came from her laptop. Nola had always been careless with passwords, using the same combination for everything. Her email contained 6 months of correspondence with Felix that read like a romance novel written by business school graduates. "Can't wait for our weekend getaway." One message read, "I've told Orion I have a client retreat." "He's so pathetic lately," another said, "always moping around about his career." "You make me feel alive again." The most recent exchange was from 3 days ago. "Felix, we need to be more careful. I think he's getting suspicious." "Nola, he's too wrapped up in his own problems to notice anything. Besides, what's he going to do? He needs me more than I need him." I printed out the most damaging messages and stored them in a folder. Evidence for later. Around noon, I got a call from my old editor at the Tribune back when it still existed. "Orion I heard about last night. Jim said someone sent me a video. That's your wife's boss." "Yeah, that's Felix. Looked like quite a party. Listen, I might have some freelance work for you. Nothing fancy, but it pays. You interested? Depends on the story. Corporate corruption piece. Some CEO's been cooking books, treating his company like a personal piggy bank. Sound familiar?" I looked at the folder of printed emails. "Very familiar. Send me the details." After hanging up, I realized this was exactly what I needed. A legitimate reason to investigate Felix's business dealings. And if I happened to discover some interesting information along the way, well, that was just good journalism. I spent the afternoon researching Felix's company, Pinnacle Marketing Solutions. On the surface, everything looked clean, profitable, growing, with Felix as the golden boy CEO who'd turned the company around after taking over from the previous owner. But dig deeper, and cracks started to show. Employee complaints about hostile work environment, rumors of favoritism in promotions, whispers about company funds being used for personal expenses. Most interesting was a former employee named Janet Morrison, who'd left the company 6 months ago after filing a complaint with HR. The complaint had been dismissed, and she'd been quietly let go with a severance package that included a non-disclosure agreement. I found Janet's number and called her. "I don't talk about Pinnacle," she said immediately. "I signed papers. I'm not asking you to break any agreements. I'm just wondering if you'd be interested in knowing that someone's finally looking into Felix Roard's business practices." There was a long pause. "What kind of someone?" "The kind with a journalism background and nothing left to lose." Another pause. "There's a coffee shop on 5th Street called Murphy's. I'll be there at 3 if you happen to show up, and if we happen to talk about general business practices in the marketing industry, well, that's just conversation between acquaintances." At 3 o'clock, I sat across from Janet Morrison in a corner booth at Murphy's. She was in her 50s, well-dressed, but tired-looking, like someone who'd been fighting battles she couldn't win. "Felix is charming," she said, stirring her coffee. "Everyone loves him at first. He's got this way of making you feel like you're part of something special, like you're in his inner circle. But he's also vindictive. Cross him and he'll destroy you." I made the mistake of questioning some expense reports, wondering why company money was paying for weekend trips that seemed awfully personal. What happened? Suddenly, I was making mistakes I'd never made before. My work was being scrutinized, criticized, undermined. Other employees started avoiding me. Then came the harassment complaints. People saying I was difficult to work with, that I was creating a hostile environment. Was any of it true? Janet laughed bitterly. I'd been Employee of the Month 3 times that year. But Felix has a way of rewriting history. By the time they let me go, even I was starting to doubt myself. What about the other employees? Anyone else see what was happening? A few, but they were smart enough to keep their mouths shut. Jobs are hard to come by, and Felix has connections throughout the industry. Cross him, and you might find yourself blacklisted. I thought about Nola, about how her career had suddenly taken off after she started working closely with Felix. What about promotions? How does that work there? Merit, officially, but really it's about loyalty, about how well you play Felix's games. She paused, studying my face. Your wife works there, doesn't she? She does. Then you probably know more about Felix's promotion process than you realize. I thanked Janet and left the coffee shop with a clearer picture of what I was dealing with. Felix wasn't just a successful businessman. He was a manipulator who used his power to control people's lives and careers. That evening, Nola came home looking frazzled. Her usually perfect hair was disheveled, and she'd chewed off most of her lipstick. "We need to talk about last night," she said, dropping her purse on the kitchen counter. "What about it?" "Don't play dumb, Orion. That wine incident was too convenient, too perfectly timed." I looked up from my laptop where I'd been working on my freelance article about corporate corruption. "You think I somehow sabotaged Felix's drink? How would I even do that?" "I don't know. But Nola, I was standing 20 feet away when it happened. There's probably security footage that proves it." She studied my face, looking for tells, for signs of deception. But I'd had years of practice interviewing people who didn't want to talk. I knew how to keep my expression neutral. "The whole thing was humiliating," she said finally. "For Felix, maybe. But these things happen. Wine spills, accidents occur. At least no one got hurt. This could damage his reputation, the company's reputation. I'm sure a successful CEO can handle a little embarrassment. Besides, from what I hear, Felix is pretty good at managing his image." Something in my tone made her look at me sharply. "What do you mean by that?" "Nothing specific, just that he seems like the kind of man who knows how to handle problems." We stared at each other across the kitchen, and I could see her trying to figure out how much I knew, how much I suspected. The smart play would be to back down, to apologize for whatever she thought I'd done, to try to smooth things over. Instead, she went on the attack. "You know what I think? I think you're jealous. Jealous that I have a successful career while you're sitting here sending out resumes and getting rejection letters." "Maybe I am jealous," I said. "Must be nice to have such a supportive boss." Her face flushed. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing. Just that Felix seems very invested in your success. He recognizes talent when he sees it." Something you might try sometime. I closed my laptop and stood up. You're right, Nola. I should definitely pay more attention to recognizing talent. As I walked toward the stairs, she called after me. Where are you going? To work on a story about corporate leadership and business ethics. Should be fascinating research. I left her standing in the kitchen, and I could feel her eyes on my back as I climbed the stairs. Let her wonder what I knew. Let her worry about what I might discover. The game was just getting started. 3 days later, I was parked across the street from the Meridian Gallery, watching through a telephoto lens as Nola and Felix examined abstract paintings that probably cost more than my annual salary. They moved through the space like they owned it. Her hand resting on his arm, his fingers occasionally brushing her back. I'd found out about their gallery visit the same way I discovered everything else, by paying attention. Nola had mentioned needing to work late again, but her calendar showed no meetings after 3. A quick check of Felix's social media revealed his enthusiasm for supporting local artists at a private gallery opening. The camera I was using belonged to my freelance work, officially for photographing corporate events. Unofficially, it was perfect for surveillance. Through the lens, I watched Felix lean close to whisper something in Nola's ear. She laughed, tilting her head back in that way she used to laugh at my jokes back when we still told each other jokes. My phone buzzed with a text from Sasha. Package delivered to his car. You sure about this? I typed back. Positive. The package was a small device that would track Felix's movements. Not illegal. You could buy them online for keeping tabs on teenage drivers, but very useful for understanding someone's patterns. I also had a backup plan, something more immediate and satisfying. Felix drove a pristine white BMW, the kind of car that screamed success and demanded attention. It was parked in the gallery's VIP section, probably worth more than most people made in 2 years. While they browsed art inside, I walked casually past the BMW, dropping a small packet near the front tire. The packet contained biodegradable glitter mixed with a substance that would activate when the car moved, creating a spectacular light show that would coat everything in sparkles. Harmless, but devastating for someone as image-conscious as Felix. I was back in my car when they emerged from the gallery. Felix had his arm around Nola's waist now, all pretense of professional relationship abandoned. They stood by his car for a moment, talking in low voices, and I managed to capture several clear photos of their intimate conversation. Then Felix started his car. The glitter bomb activated immediately. Thousands of tiny sparkles erupted from under the BMW, coating the windshield, the hood, and both Felix and Nola in a cloud of shimmering particles. Felix jumped out of the car, frantically brushing glitter from his suit, but the stuff was designed to stick. The more you tried to remove it, the more it spread. Within seconds, he looked like he'd been attacked by a craft store explosion. Nola stood frozen, covered in sparkles, her mouth open in shock. Other gallery visitors had stopped to stare, some pulling out phones to record the spectacle. I started my car and drove away, but not before leaving a small envelope under Felix's windshield wiper. Inside was a note. Real men clean up their own messes. A concerned citizen. That evening, I was working in my home office when Mara called. Dad, I'm coming home this weekend. She said, I need to talk to you and Mom about something. Everything okay? I don't know. People keep sending me weird videos and asking questions about you guys. What's going on? I looked at the photos I'd printed from the gallery visit spread across my desk, like evidence in a murder case. Your mother and I are working through some issues. Are you getting divorced? The question hung in the air between us. Mara was 20, old enough to handle the truth, but young enough that it would still devastate her. I don't know yet, I said finally. But whatever happens, it's not your fault. And both your mother and I love you. This is about her boss, isn't it? Felix, what makes you say that? I'm not stupid, Dad. I've seen how she talks about him, how much time she spends at work, and now there are all these videos online. What kind of videos? The wine thing from last week. And now someone posted footage of him covered in glitter. People are calling it the Felix Fails series. It's gone viral. I hadn't expected the videos to spread so widely, but I wasn't surprised. The internet loved watching powerful people get humiliated, especially when they deserved it. Dad, are you behind this? Behind what? The videos? The pranks? It's too convenient, too perfectly timed. I thought about lying, about protecting her from the ugly truth of what her parents had become. But Mara was smart, and she deserved honesty. Your mother is having an affair, I said. With Felix? I have proof. Silence on the other end of the line. Mara, I suspected, she said quietly. I hoped I was wrong. I'm sorry you have to deal with this. What are you going to do? I'm going to make sure she doesn't get away with it. And I'm going to make sure Felix understands there are consequences for his actions. Dad, you're scaring me. You're not going to do anything dangerous, are you? Nothing dangerous, nothing illegal. But I'm not going to let them destroy our family and walk away like nothing happened. After we hung up, I sat in my office looking at the evidence I'd accumulated. Photos, emails, financial records, witness statements. I had enough to destroy both Nola and Felix professionally and personally. But I wanted more than just evidence. I wanted justice. My phone rang. It was Sasha. You need to see this, she said. Felix just posted something on his company's internal message board. Someone forwarded it to me. What kind of something? A memo about security threats and disloyal employees. He's paranoid. Thinks someone's targeting him specifically. He's hired a private investigator. This was interesting. Felix was feeling threatened enough to spend money on professional help. That meant my campaign was working, getting under his skin. There's more, Sasha continued. My friend who works at Pinnacle says Felix called an emergency meeting with his board of directors. Word is someone's been asking questions about his expense reports. That would be my freelance investigation paying dividends. I'd submitted my article about corporate corruption to 3 different publications, focusing on unnamed executives who used company resources for personal gain. The details were vague enough to avoid lawsuits, but specific enough that anyone familiar with Felix's behavior would recognize the pattern. How's Nola handling all this? According to office gossip, she's been stressed out, snapping at people, making mistakes she normally wouldn't make. Felix has been keeping his distance from her publicly, trying to avoid more scandal. Perfect. Nothing destroyed a relationship faster than one partner becoming a liability to the other's career. Sasha, I need you to do something for me. What kind of something? Nothing illegal, but I need you to find out when Felix's wife is planning to attend her next charity event. The kind where spouses are expected to show up. Why? Because it's time Mrs. Roard learned what her husband does in his spare time. I hung up and returned to my desk, where I began composing a carefully worded letter. It would be anonymous, of course, but it would contain enough specific details about Felix's affair to get his wife's attention. Sometimes the best revenge was simply making sure the right people knew the truth. As I worked, I thought about Mara's question. What was I going to do? The answer was simple. I was going to systematically destroy Felix Roard's carefully constructed life, piece by piece, until he understood what it felt like to lose everything that mattered. And then I was going to decide what to do about Nola. Felix's wife, Catherine Roard, was everything Nola aspired to be. Old money, genuine class, and the kind of social connections that opened doors throughout the city. I'd researched her background thoroughly. Harvard MBA, served on the boards of 3 major charities, came from a family that had been funding museums and hospitals for generations. She was also, according to my sources, completely unaware of her husband's extracurricular activities. The charity gala was being held at the Grandview Hotel, the same place where this whole mess had started 2 weeks ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd purchased a ticket using my freelance journalism credentials. Covering local philanthropy was a legitimate story, and my press pass got me access to areas where regular guests couldn't go. I positioned myself near the bar where I could observe the main entrance. Catherine arrived at 7:30, elegant in a navy dress that probably cost more than my car. She moved through the crowd with the confidence of someone who belonged in these circles, greeting people by name, clearly comfortable in her element. Felix arrived 20 minutes later, alone. He looked nervous, constantly checking his phone, his eyes scanning the crowd like he expected trouble. The glitter incident had left him paranoid, and the online videos had made him a minor celebrity for all the wrong reasons. I watched him greet his wife with a perfunctory kiss on the cheek, the kind of gesture that spoke of obligation rather than affection. They stood together for photos, playing the role of the successful power couple. But there was tension in their body language. Around 9 o'clock, I made my move. I prepared a manila envelope containing printed photos from the gallery visit, along with selected excerpts from Nola and Felix's email correspondence. Nothing that could be traced back to me, but damning enough to raise serious questions. I approached Catherine during a quiet moment when Felix was across the room talking to potential investors. "Mrs. Roard, I'm Orion Vanton, freelance journalist. I wonder if I might have a word with you privately." She looked at me with polite curiosity. "Of course. What publication are you with?" "I'm working on a story about corporate ethics and personal responsibility, specifically how executives' private behavior affects their companies and families." Her expression became more guarded. "I'm not sure I understand." I handed her the envelope. "I think you should see this before it becomes public knowledge." She opened it right there, her face growing pale as she looked at the photos of her husband with his arms around another woman. The email excerpts were worse intimate conversations that left no doubt about the nature of the relationship. "Where did you get these?" she asked, her voice steady but her hands shaking slightly. "That's not important. What matters is that this information is going to come out. The question is whether you want to control how and when that happens." Catherine looked across the room at Felix, who was still smoozing with investors, completely unaware that his world was about to collapse. "What do you want?" she asked. "I want justice. Your husband has been using his position to manipulate people's careers and lives. The woman in those photos is my wife. She's not his first affair, and she won't be his last unless someone stops him. And you think I should be that someone? I think you deserve to know the truth about the man you're married to." Catherine closed the envelope and looked at me with new interest. "You're the husband." "I am. This must be very painful for you." "What's painful is watching him destroy people's lives for his own amusement. What's painful is seeing my wife throw away 20 years of marriage for someone who treats her like a disposable toy." She was quiet for a long moment, processing what I'd told her. "There's going to be a board meeting next week," she said finally. "Felix doesn't know I have contacts there, but I do. My family has investments in several companies that do business with Pinnacle." "What kind of contacts?" "The kind that take accusations of misconduct very seriously, especially when there's documentation." I felt a surge of satisfaction. Catherine Rohr wasn't just a wealthy socialite. She was a businesswoman who understood how power really worked in this city. "There's something else," I said, and handed her a second envelope. Financial records showing company funds being used for personal expenses, hotel bills, restaurant charges, gifts that were never reported as taxable income. She looked through the documents, her expression growing colder with each page. "How did you get access to these?" "I'm a journalist. It's what I do. This is enough to trigger an IRS investigation. That's the idea." Catherine looked across the room again, where Felix was now posing for photos with the charity's board members, his arm around a young volunteer who looked uncomfortable with his attention. "He's not going to stop," she said. "Even if he ends things with your wife, there will be others." "I know. And you think public humiliation will change that?" "I think consequences change behavior. Right now, Felix believes he's untouchable. It's time he learned otherwise." She closed the second envelope and looked at me with something that might have been respect. "What happens to your wife in all this?" "That's between her and me." "And your marriage?" "Probably over. But at least it'll be over on my terms, not his." Catherine nodded slowly. "I'll make some calls tomorrow. Quietly, discreetly, but effectively. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. This kind of thing gets messy and innocent people sometimes get hurt. More innocent people will get hurt if nothing changes." As I walked away, I felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction because I'd set forces in motion that would bring Felix down. Sadness because I was systematically destroying the life I'd built with Nola, even if she'd been the one to poison it first. My phone buzzed with a text from Nola. "Working late again. Don't wait up." I looked around the gala, but she wasn't there. Which meant she was somewhere else with Felix, probably celebrating what they thought was their successful deception. They had no idea what was coming. I drove home through the quiet streets, past the house where Mara had taken her first steps, where Nola and I had planted a garden that first spring, where we'd hosted birthday parties and holiday dinners and all the small celebrations that make up a marriage. Tomorrow, I would continue my campaign to destroy Felix Roard. But tonight, I allowed myself to grieve for what I was losing, even as I prepared to finish what they had started. The endgame was approaching, and I intended to win. The warehouse district looked like a graveyard of abandoned dreams. Empty buildings lined the streets, their broken windows reflecting the gray morning sky like red eyes. It was the perfect place for what I had planned. Isolated, dramatic, and symbolic of everything Felix had helped destroy in this city. I'd chosen the old Meridian processing plant, a massive brick building that had once employed 300 people before corporate restructuring moved the jobs overseas. Now it sat empty, waiting for gentrification or demolition, whichever came first. The anonymous tip I'd sent to both Nola and Felix was simple. "If you want the evidence to disappear, meet at the Meridian building on Industrial Boulevard at noon. Come alone, bring cash, and this all goes away." Of course, I had no intention of taking their money or making any deals. But they didn't know that. I arrived 2 hours early using my key to the building. I'd gotten it from the security company that monitored the property, claiming I was scouting locations for a documentary about industrial decline. The key had cost me $200, but it was worth it for the access. The building's interior was a maze of empty rooms and abandoned equipment. I'd spent the previous day setting up cameras in strategic locations, all connected to a wireless system that would broadcast everything to a private server. Whatever happened here would be recorded from multiple angles. I also had backup. Sasha was positioned outside with instructions to call the police if things went badly. And I'd left detailed instructions with my lawyer about what to do with the evidence if something happened to me. At 11:30, I heard a car approaching. Through the grimy windows, I watched Felix's BMW pull into the parking lot. He sat in the car for several minutes, probably working up the courage to come inside. Nola arrived 10 minutes later in her silver sedan. They met in the parking lot, talking in urgent whispers, clearly nervous about walking into what might be a trap. They were right to be nervous. I watched from the second floor as they entered the building, calling out cautiously. "We're here," Felix shouted. "Where are you?" I activated the building's old PA system, my voice echoing through the empty spaces. "Third floor, come up the main staircase, and Felix, leave your phone on the first floor." "I know you've been recording conversations lately." They climbed the stairs slowly, Felix in his expensive suit, looking completely out of place in the industrial setting. Nola wore her power outfit, designer jacket, heels that clicked against the concrete steps, the armor of a successful businesswoman. I was waiting for them in what used to be the main production floor, a vast open space with high ceilings and excellent acoustics. Perfect for dramatic confrontations. "Orion," Nola called out as they reached the top of the stairs. "Over here." They walked toward me across the empty floor, their footsteps echoing in the silence. Felix looked angry and scared in equal measure. Nola just looked tired. "What do you want?" Felix demanded when they were close enough for normal conversation. "I want you to understand something," I said. "Both of you. I want you to understand what it feels like when someone systematically destroys your life for their own amusement." "This is insane," Nola said. "Whatever you think you know, I know everything." I pulled out a folder thick with printed documents, 6 months of emails, financial records showing company funds used for personal expenses, photos from your romantic gallery visits, witness statements from former employees about Felix's pattern of harassment and manipulation. Felix's face had gone pale. "You can't prove any of that." "Actually, I can, and I already have. Your wife has seen the evidence, Nola. So has Felix's board of directors. The IRS received an anonymous tip yesterday about unreported income and misuse of corporate funds." "You're lying," Felix said. But his voice lacked conviction. "Am I?" "Check your phone, Felix. I bet you have some interesting voicemails waiting." He looked at his phone, which he'd left downstairs as instructed, then back at me with growing panic. "What do you want?" Nola asked again. "Money? We can pay you." "I don't want your money. I want you to understand consequences. For 20 years, Nola, I supported your career, your dreams, your ambitions. I celebrated your successes and helped you through your failures. And you threw it all away for someone who sees you as a disposable plaything." "That's not true," she said. But she didn't look at Felix when she said it. "Isn't it, Felix? Tell her about Janet Morrison. Tell her about the other women you've manipulated and discarded over the years." Felix said nothing, his jaw clenched tight. "Tell her about your wife's family connections, about how their money and influence built your career. Tell her what happens to your lifestyle when Catherine divorces you and takes half of everything." "Shut up," Felix snarled. "Or what? You'll fire me? Destroy my reputation? I'm unemployed and my reputation is already ruined. What exactly do you think you can take from me that you haven't already taken?" The truth of that statement seemed to hit him like a physical blow. Felix Rohr was used to having leverage over people, used to being able to threaten careers and livelihoods. But I had nothing left to lose, which made me dangerous. "This ends now," I continued. "Felix, you're going to resign from Pinnacle. You're going to quietly disappear from the business community, and you're never going to contact my wife again. And if I don't, then everything I have goes public. Every email, every photo, every financial record. Your board will have no choice but to fire you for cause, which means no severance package. The IRS investigation will proceed, and your wife's lawyers will make sure you get nothing in the divorce. Felix looked around the empty warehouse like a trapped animal. You can't do this. I already am doing it. Orion, please, Nola said, stepping forward. We can work this out. We can go to counseling. Try to save our marriage. I looked at her. Really looked at her. For the first time in months, she was still beautiful. Still the woman I'd fallen in love with 22 years ago. But something essential had changed. Something that couldn't be repaired with counseling or apologies. It's too late for that, I said. You made your choice 6 months ago. Now you have to live with the consequences. So, what happens now? She asked. Now you both leave. Felix disappears quietly, and you figure out how to rebuild your career without his protection. Our marriage is over, but we'll handle the divorce civilly for Mara's sake. And the evidence stays private as long as you both stay away from me and my family. Felix started to say something, but Nola put her hand on his arm. It's over, she said quietly. We lost. They walked away across the empty floor, their footsteps echoing in the vast space. At the staircase, Felix turned back. This isn't finished, he called out. Yes, it is, I replied. You just don't know it yet. I watched from the window as they got in their separate cars and drove away. Then I collected my cameras and equipment, erasing any trace of what had happened here. My phone rang as I was loading everything into my car. It was Mara. Dad, I just got a weird call from Mom. She was crying, saying something about mistakes and consequences. What happened? Your mother and I are getting divorced, I said. But it's going to be okay. We're going to handle it like adults, and you're not going to get caught in the middle. Are you okay? I looked back at the warehouse, then at the city skyline beyond it. Somewhere out there, Felix was probably getting the phone calls that would end his career. Somewhere else, Nola was beginning to understand the full scope of what she'd lost. Yeah, I said. I'm going to be fine. And for the first time in months, I actually believed it. 2 weeks later, Felix Roard quietly resigned from Pinnacle Marketing Solutions, citing personal reasons. The company's board announced they were conducting a thorough review of corporate policies and financial procedures. Nola moved out of our house and into a small apartment across town. She found a new job at a smaller agency, taking a significant pay cut, but grateful to find work at all. Mara came home that weekend, and we had a long conversation about honesty, consequences, and the difference between revenge and justice. Are you happy? She asked as we sat on the back porch looking at the garden Nola and I had planted together years ago. I'm satisfied, I said. That's not the same thing as happy, but it's a start. The freelance work was picking up, and I'd started writing a book about corporate corruption and personal responsibility. It would probably never be a bestseller, but it felt important to tell the story. Sometimes I wondered if I'd gone too far, if there might have been another way to handle things. But then I'd remember Felix's smirk as he spilled wine on my shirt, or Nola's casual dismissal of our marriage in those emails. And I knew I'd done what needed to be done. They'd made their choices. I'd simply made sure those choices had consequences. In the end, that was enough.